Today's daf is daf Yud, and we're up to the by same of the last two words on daf Tes Amid Beis. And the Gemara is trying to identify which Tana is the Tana of Mishnah that distinguishes between Nedarim and Misnadvim. That Nedarim are Rishayim, they're not doing the way you're supposed to, but Misnadvim are doing the way you're supposed to, and they are ksherim. So the Gemara until now was operating within the framework of Rabbi Meir, and now on Daf Yudam and Aleph, Afilu Tema Rabbi Yehuda. Even if we assume that we can attribute the authorship of our Mishnah that distinguishes between Neder and Nedarim to Rabbi Yehuda, who holds that the pasuk is coming to be Mishabeach, is coming to, if you will, recommend a Noder who's Mashlim, who pays up his Neder, and he's considered a good guy, and he's better than someone who doesn't take a Neder at all. And this is all a machlokas between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir as to how to learn a pasuk in Koheles, Eis asher tidor tishalim tov asher lo tidor misha tidor v'lo tishalim. So that according to Rabbi Yehuda, if it's Eis asher tidor shalim, he takes a shvur, but he lives up to his obligation, he's better than someone who doesn't take a neder at all. Kiyom Rabbi Yehuda, when does Rabbi Yehuda say that it's praiseworthy to take a neder and fulfill the neder? That's b'nedava. When he says to an animal, he points to an animal, he says harei zu. And therefore, if it's harei zu, then in the worst case scenario, if the animal gets lost or dies, he doesn't have any responsibility to replace the animal. That's called an nedava. And in that case, it's admirable for him to take the neder of nedava and to pay it up. But neder, when he says harei alai, Lo Omer Rabbi Yehuda says that's not a good idea. That's something that should be avoided, because then we have a chashash takola, in event that the animal gets lost and he's obligated to replace it because he said harei alai b'lashon neder, and he might not come around to replace it. So our Mishnah reflects the shita of Rabbi Yehuda, and therefore the Mishnah distinguishes between Nedarim and Misnavdim. And it's the derech of the ksherim lindov, nedava, when he says harei zu, but not to take a neder of harei alai. So the Gemara immediately objects, Vaktani, but the brisa of Rabbi Yehuda says tov mizeh, umizeh, noder umekayim. The language of Rabbi Yehuda in the brisa is quoted and recorded in the brisa is noder. And he's saying the best of all options, as we discussed yesterday, there are three options: not to take a neder and fail to fulfill it, or to take a neder and to fulfill it. He seems to advocate, Rabbi Yehuda, and admire he who takes a neder and fulfills it. Doesn't say anything about nedava. So the Gemara changes the girsa to me, nodev umakayim. It shouldn't say in the brisa noder umakayim, but rather nodev umakayim. He's the category of individuals that is admired and recommended by Rabbi Yehuda. So tov mizeh nodev umakayim. The best of all options is someone who's nodev. He's better than someone who doesn't take an nedav at all. But noder umakayim, even Rabbi Yehuda would say that's not a good idea. That's not derech haksherim, because we're always afraid when he says harei alai in a lashon neder that there may be a takola in event that the animal that he's mafresh later on gets lost, because he said harei alai b'lashon neder, and that obligates him to replace the animal that gets lost. However, now the Gemara is going to present or predicate a different distinction between neder and nedava, which justifies why a neder is lo ksherim, is l'shayim, and nedava is ksherim. Maishna noder delo. Why is it that Rabbi Yehuda says no? He says no, thumbs down to someone who takes a neder. Dilma osi boli de takol, and David Nami Dilma osi de takol. Now at this point, the Gemara makes a transition in terms of what the takol that we're afraid of is. Until now, we said the takol was the fear that if the animal that he designates as a carbon gets lost, he might not replace it. Now the Gemara is saying no. There's an equal takola in both neder and nedarim. What's that? That's baltiacher l'shalmo. That 3 regalim might pass by before he brings the carbon to the Beis Hamikdash. And it makes no difference whether it's harei olai b'loshen neder or harei zu b'loshen nedava. In both cases, we have to be choshesh, we have to be afraid and suspect that maybe he'll delay bringing the carbon. So in the case of Nedava, when he says harei zu ola, maybe he won't bring it within the 3 regalim, and he'll be violating the Isur Lav of Baal Tiacher. And therefore, logically, even in a case of Nedava, the Ksherim should be avoiding a Nedava because we don't want to put them into a situation in which, heaven forbid, they might violate the Isur Baal Tiacher. So what logic is there for Rabbi Yehuda to maintain an admirable position, a positive approach, an attitude towards a Nadvan who you takes in a Nedava? And the Gemara answers that Rabbi Yehuda advocates in favor of an Nedava in a way that he sets it up that there should be no takola, and that he will immediately bring the karma. How is that? Because Rabbi Yehuda l'tamei, Rabbi Yehuda is consistent with a shita, a view that he presented elsewhere. And that is, what is the method by which a person should take an nedava? Other maybe kibsasol azara, he should take a little shepsala, which is still chulin, and bring it to the Pesach Azara, to the entranceway into the Azara, umakdisha, and only at the Pesach Azara, 1 second before he shefts it, he's magdish it. Immediately after he's magdish it, the Pesach Azara, he does smicha, somech oleha, v'shochatani, immediately shefts the animal. So that there's no delay whatsoever between his Hakadasha and his bringing the animal as a carbon in the Azara. On this situation, fulfilling this dictum and this advice of Rabbi Yehuda made the claim that it's admirable to take a nedava because he's removed the chashash of Baal Tiacher. But maybe there's a chashash, the animal will get lost. The answer is that in the case of nedava, if the animal gets lost, in the worst case scenario, he has no obligation to replace it because his nedava was harei zu. The Gemara now argues, now Rabbi Meir holds that apparently even in this case where he's magdishit right at the Pesach Azara, there still is a chash of takolas me'ila. Because not everyone is a bucky to be careful and do exactly what Hillel, as we saw in the previous daf, had advocated. And also the Achronim here point out that the Gemara shifts here to a statement of Rabbi Yehuda advocating bringing his kivsa to the Azor, etc. Why not quote Hillel that we had learned earlier? So the Gemara wanted to say l'shitaso, that even Rabbi Yehuda himself has a way of circumventing the chash takol. Gemara asks, "Teinet midava the karbanos." Yeah, it makes sense that a person could be magdish the carbon of Pesach Hazor and avoid any takola. But Nedava the Nazirus, and we said in the Mishnah that it's derech haksherim to take an Nedava of Nazirus, ma'ikol meimah. How can you tell me that ksherim should be encouraged to take Nedarim of Nazirus? There's always a takola. Maybe he'll cut his hair, maybe he'll enter into a Beis HaKfaros, maybe he'll drink wine and violate one or the other Isurim of Nazirus. So the Gemara answers, Rabbi Yehuda l'tamei, Rabbi Yehuda is consistent. This Sanya, we learned in the Bryce, Rabbi Yehuda Omer Chasidim Rishonim is Avim Lavi Karban Chatas. Now I'm going to try to explain this statement of Rabbi Yehuda in the best way I can. And I apologize from this get-go. It's a very difficult statement. But the premise here is that a chassid from the Hasidim Rishonim would try, because of his love for Hashem that burns within him, to be Mekayim every single mitzvah. Now, obviously, that's impossible. But Yisrael could not do the avodah, he can't aspire to become a Kohen. But as far as karbonos are concerned, to bring a carbon, there are many different categories of karbonos, this exact number. Each category of a carbon represents a mitzvah unto itself, and you don't require a Kohen. So Chasidim Rishonim have a desire to fulfill every mitzvah that they possibly can. And again, Lufiani is daiti, I think the underlying premise here is that every single mitzvah, and for that matter, every single category of the four categories of karbonos, each of which is a mitzvah unto itself, has its own individual power. It's a linkage to his karvus Lashem. And the problem is that, let's say, for example, in the case of a carbon chatos, that requires that you violated chiyuv kares bishkada. And the Hasidim or Rishonim would never ever come to violate even bishkada a chet sheyesh bo kares lefi she'ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu maybe takol yideim. God protects them based on the principle haboli tor messiah also min hashamayim and raglei chasidim yishma. God would never allow a tzaddik to be nichshal bishkada in avera sheyesh bo kares, and therefore it's a null set. It's impossible for Hasidim Rishonim to ever be chayiv a karban chatas. And now, because of their ava and their chasidus and their desire to fulfill every single mitzvah that a non-Kohen could possibly fulfill, they want to have an opportunity to bring that unique karban chatas, but it's impossible. So Maria Osim, I owned him as not with the Naziris Lamakom, Kadesh is chayiv karban chatas Lamakom. The Torah says in Parshas Nosol, Zos Torah Sad Nosir, B'yom Ulos V'yei, Zavei Krivas Karbono Hashem, V'kavsa Achas Bash Nosa Tniva L'chatos. A Nazir, when he completes his Naziris, is obligated amongst an entire set of Karbonos. One of them included in that set is a Karban Chatos. He's got to bring 3 Karbonos, a Keves Liola, a Kivsa L'chatos, and an Ayel L'shlomim. So the Hasidim Rishonim, by accepting upon themselves Nazirus, would guarantee that they would bring a Karban Chatas. That's the way they could fulfill this mitzvah without having violated any Chet Bishkaga. And they had a Kavanah Shlema Ritzuya, and therefore we don't have to worry about the possibility of Takala, that they would accidentally walk into a Beis HaKfaros or drink wine, etc., because they would be absolutely careful and meticulous about the observance of Nazirus, because they took upon themselves Nazirus b'kavana shlema ritzuya. That's the Hasidim Rishonim. So that now we appreciate, what about an David the Nazirus? How could it be that the Brisa would advocate taking upon Nazirus without being concerned with the possibility of a takola? And the Gemara now quotes a dissenting view of Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon Omer Chasidim Rishonim lo nadru bin nazir. It's not true. The way Rabbi Yehuda had formulated that the Chasidim Rishonim would take upon themselves Nazirus, Ela harotza lahavi ola misnade bumevi. He could take a nedava to bring a carbon ola or shlomim misnade bumevi, because shlomim also likewise lends itself to a carbon nedava. Chatas doesn't lend itself to a nedava. Toda v'arba mine lachma is misnade bumevi, a carbon toda, who brings 4 categories of lachamim, 10 chalos, 10 rekikim dakim, 10 revuchim, which is kemach shenichlat b'mayim roschen. These 30 are matzah. The od asori brings another 10 lachmei chametz, and a carbon toda is ba b'nedava. Abel, says Reb Shimon, the Naziris Los, now the Hasidim Rishonim would not want to bring a carbon chatas and accept upon themselves the Nazirus. Why? Because a Nazir by definition is called a chote, and therefore a chassid would not want to be a chote. The Torah does not want a chassid to take upon himself Nazirus and be a chote. And the Gemara is going to explain why a Nazir is a chote. Shenemar, the Torah says in Parshas Naso, in the context of the Karbonos of a Nazir, v'chiper olav mesher chata al nefesh, that the Torah specifies and reveals that the reason, the underlying logic, that we obligate a Nazir, b'siyum niziruso, to bring a chatos, is because he is chata al nefesh. And as the Gemara is going to darshan soon, he's mitzayer atzmo min hayayin. Yayin is inherently good if it's used in the right way, and the Torah doesn't want a person to prohibit and exclude himself from yayin. Omer Abai Shimon Atzadik Reb Shimon Reb Elazar Kapor Kula b'shitachas the Nazir Choteha. Why is it that all these Tanoim agree that a Nazir is a Chote? So first of all, we have Shimon Atzadik Reb Shimon Ha'adei Amaran. Shimon Atzadik would never eat from the asham of a Nazir Tomei. He was always afraid that if the Nazir contracted tumah, now he has to start from the beginning, a Yomi Rishonim Yitlu. And he never bargained for an extra 30 days of Nazirus. Therefore, he has a thought that crosses his mind when the Yetzer Hara gets the best of him and says, no, you shouldn't have ever become a Nazir. So he has charot and he's toal Rishonos. And Shimon HaTzadik did not want to eat from such a karman. It's almost as if he's not a Nazir, it's Chul Lazara. Rabbi Shimon says the Hasidim Rishonim did not want to be called Chatoim. And what about Rabbi Elazar HaKapor Berebi? The word Berebi here doesn't mean the son of Rebbe, but Berebi means that he's a great Tana, a great scholar. The Sanya Rabbi Elazar HaKapor Berebi, he was the gadol of his generation. Omer, he views it as if, when it says in the Pasuk with Hebrew, he's a chote because he prohibited himself from yayin. The Torah wants us to drink wine and do it in a way that's uplifting, that's a kirma mitzvah, that's part of the avodas Hashem. He's mitzayer himself min yayin. And now, Reb Shimon HaKapor continues. I'm sorry, Reb Elazar HaKapor, I said Reb Shimon, continues on this vein to tell us that a person who fasts is certainly a chote. He knows he's called a chote, and he has to bring a karban chatos for the very fact that he excluded himself from yayin. Is a mitzayer atzma kol davar, a person who takes upon himself a tainus to prohibit himself from any food, is alachas kama l'kama. How much more so he's called a chote? Mikan shekol yoshe b'tainus nikra chote. And I want to finish this last piece to the Mishnah, but I have something to say here that really bothers my mind. Vadein Krab in Nazir Tomix. The Gemara asks, why are you quoting a pasuk asher chata al nefesh to prove that a Nazir is a chote should see her atzim in a yayin. That pasuk is referring explicitly to a Nazir who went into a Beis HaKvaros. He was mitami himself, he was careless. But Stam Nazir, who was not mitami himself, he's not called a chote. And the Gemara answers, Mishum deshana b'chetu, when the Torah says, with regard to a Nazir Tameh asher chat al nefesh, it means that in addition to the fundamental chet of being mitzayir himself in a yayin by taking upon himself Nazirus, to boot, on top of it, he's not only a Nazir Tar, but he's a Nazir Tameh, and he has another chet because a Nazir is enjoined from being mitami himself, and he was mitami himself. And the Gemara apparently is medayik now from the Lashon Akra. The Lashon of Pasuk is asher chata, and then another phrase that's l'chor redundant, al hanefesh. And the Torah could have said me'asher chata, v'chipar olam me'asher chata, and stop there, quit while you're ahead, kol hamosim korea. Why did the Torah have to add the words al hanefesh? And the answer is, the al hanefesh is an allusion to the very faith of accepting upon himself Nazirus. He was mitzayer atzmo min hayayin. And before we go on to the Mishnah, I just want to express my confusion here, and maybe you can help me with this, Rabbi. The Rishonim, in their commentary in the Parsha, in their various commentaries, whether it's the Ramban, whether it's Ibn Ezra and others, on Parshas Nasa, they speak about the great level achieved by a Nazir, the Kedushas Nazir. And the Rambam seems to assume that Kedushas Nazir is even greater than the Kedusha of a Navi. The Ibn Ezra says, Nezer al Rosho, the word Nezer, which is the root of the word Nazir, is a crown on the head of a king. And a Nazir who controls himself and is disciplined and overcomes all his taivas, he is a melech, who Moshe al-Atzmo. And the Ramban also is marich, but with the Kedusha and the level of sanctity of a Nazir. And as far as Tainios is concerned, the Gemara is full of stories about various Amoraim that fasted. So I don't know exactly how to make sense out of this. I'm tempted to believe, off the record, that the Torah has a dialectic approach to the concept of precious. That on the one hand, under certain circumstances, precious is considered a great thing. It's admirable, and the Torah advocates in precious. The Ramchal in his Mesilas Yesharim has a great deal to say about the Darga of precious. So that a Nazir, or someone who's Yoshev B'Tainis, is certainly something positive. He's a person that should be admired for his level of precious and Kedusha. But on the other hand, that's only a temporary, almost a b'di'evid kind of situation. Like Achila, the way God created man, he's meant to take Achila and Shasiya as a challenge to uplift it and sanctify it and channel it for Avodas Hashem. That's the ideal way of doing it. Maybe under certain circumstances, which are particular needs and dire needs under those circumstances, then precious is admirable, but ultimately the highest level is not precious, but to take yayin and elevate it and channel it directed towards Avodas Hashem, and all achila should be the same. Now, at the beginning of the Masechta, the Mishnah tells us that kinui Nedarim have the same status as Nedarim. Kinui Charavim, like Charavim, kini Shuas, Keshuas, kini Naziris, kini Naziris. Our Mishnah is now going to tell us an entire list of kinuyim. Ha'omer, a person turns to his friend, and we are going to go with the Bach who takes out the word lechavero, but rather Omer, he says to himself, he's got a kikar, and he says the words konam. Instead of saying the word olai karman, he used the kinui of konam. Alternatively, he says kikar olai konach, which is also kinui for karman, or konos. Hareilu kinuyim l'karban. These are words They are bastardized forms of the word karma, and it is how as a neder. He's being matvis the kikar and making it like konam, which means a karma. Likewise, we have kinuyim of charonim. Instead of using the word cherem, we use the word cherek or cherach or cheref. Harelu kinuyim lecherem. And now we're talking about cherme gavoa, as the Ran says. Now we have kinuyei nezirus. We've got nozik, noziach, poziach. Harelu kinuyim lenezirus. Now we're up to kinuyei shvuos, shvusa, shkuka. And in all these cases, he has to add another word. For example, in the case of kinuyei nezirus, he doesn't just say the word nozik or noziach. He says hareini nozik. Or in the case of a kinui of a shvua, he adds the word shelo ochal. So he says shvusa shelo ochal, shkuka shelo ochal. Then the Mishnah has noder b'mohi. Now the word mohi is a kinui for Moshe. So he's saying that my shvua should be chal like the shvua of Moshe. And the Ran quotes a pasuk in Shmos Beis, Vayoel Moshe Lasheves. And the Ran understands it that Moshe Rabbeinu took some sort of a shvua. I'm not exactly sure. We have to look that up in Shmos Beis, exactly what the nature of his shvua was. And the Meiri adds that Nodar b'ma'ul, that's another form of the word Moshe. But then he quotes a pasuk of Shmuel, Aleph, Perek Yudalid, Nishba Shaul. So it could be that Ma'ul is a kinui of the name Shaul, and he's taking upon himself the Shvua of Shaul. In the Masechet, he quotes the Rambam in Sefer Mitzvahs, Mitzvah Say Zion, regarding the kavan of Nishba b'Moshe. He writes, "Val derech hazu yishavu umasenu." Our nation, meaning the Jewish nation, will take Shavuos b'shem Moshe Rabbeinu. V'zeh yadua shanishba yirtza lomar belohei Moshe. That's the chiddush of the Rambam. That when a person is nishba b'shem Moshe, it means b'shem Elokei Moshe, or b'misha sholach Moshe. So the Rambam is offering a pshat here that he's not taking a shvua like the shvua that Moshe Rabbeinu, but like the God of Moshe Rabbeinu. And there's a Rashi in Masechet Beitza that says he was nishba b'chvodo shel Moshe. And the Mishnah concludes by saying, Harei elu kinuyim l'shvua. And now we get to the famous machloket between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish about what exactly is a kinui. Itmar kinuyim Rabbi Yochanan Amar Loshen Umoshen. These are foreign languages. So at this point, I suggest that we go back to the Ran for a moment at the beginning of Masechet Nedarim. The Ran writes, and you'll see this in the wide lines of the Ran, approximately 15 lines down. The line begins with the word kinuyim. Ve'ikal ameda l'Rab Yochanan the Amar Loshen Nachrim him. Maishna de Parish Hanech Lishni. Why does the Mishnah enumerate the following Lishonos? Konos. Tvei Mishar Lishni. Lema, the Mishnah should have said, Ano de B'chol Loshon Nidro Nedek. I mean, we know of 70 languages. Today, I mean, maybe there are 120 languages. So why is it that Rabbi Yochanan according to Rabbi Yochanan Lashon Nachum, that the Mishnah has to go into detail and give us an enumerated list. Why not say in a general sense, Hanoder b'chol lashon nidjo neder? And now the Ran drops a bomb, and he says, you know what Lashon Nachum is? Lashon Nachum is also a kinui, in the sense that it's not the original, but rather a bastardization of the original language. Of what original language? Says the Ran, these are kinuyim of Lashon Kodesh. These are really fakes. This is not part of Italian or French or Spanish. These are shibushim of Lashon Kodesh, of the word konam, etc., the word shvua, nazir. I would have thought, the big chiddush here of our Mishnah is that when you are mishavish, the Lashon HaKodesh, you would say that's not a Lashon. That's not a valid legal language that we can recognize. These words from Lashon Kodesh in a shibush form have entered into other languages, and those Nachum use that language. That itself validates these words as a Lashon, and therefore the neder is chal. That's the amazing chiddush of the Ran in interpreting Rabbi Yochanan. Rav Shimon Lakish Amar Lashon Shabarolem Chacham Lios Noder B'hem. The Gemara is going to try to explain why the Chachamim created a new language or words that should replace the Lashon of Neder, Shvua, Nazirus, and Karmon. V'cheinu Omer, and the Gemara brings a proof that the word Badu Lahem Chachamim means that they were Mechadeshit Milibam, they created new words. V'cheinu Omer B'chodesh Asher Bada Milibam. So Bada means to create something that's brand new. Why did Rabbana make this takana? And the answer is the lolema karma. The Gemara is explaining Reish Lakish that the Rabbana wanted to avoid the use of the word karma. So they gave kodam instead of karma. They created a new substitute language. So whereas for lema karma, what's so terrible if we would allow him to use the word karma? Dilma karma Lashem. He might say that this is a carbon for the Almighty and mention the name of God. So what's terrible? Dilma Amar Lashem carbon. He might put the word Lashem first, and then V'lo Amar carbon, he changes his mind. He decides, I don't want to take this neder, and he drops the word carbon. V'chamapik Shem Shamayim Levato. We had a whole discussion earlier in the Masechet about the severity of the crime of mentioning God's name in vain. And if he says Lashem, and he's about to say carbon, and then he catches himself and says, no, this is not a good idea. He's going to leave out the word carbon, then Lashem becomes a Motzi Shem Shamayim Levato. And in order to avoid that, he will use the word konam instead, and then he's not going to say Lashem, because the word konam is not attached to the word Lashem. And now we're up to the brisa of Rabbi Shimon, Tanya Rabbi Shimon Omer.